on time, right? 6:30. Perfect. My name is Warren Levy. I'm chairing this committee for a request for a lease on property 84 Hospital Avenue. With us this evening, our committee members are Jack Knapp and Peter Nero, ex officio, Greg Seabury, Joe Pirio, and Joe Cavo, our council president, along with Elmer. How come I lost his last name? There you go. Sorry. Representing the petitioner is Attorney Neil Marcus. The request is for leasing of property on 84 Hospital Avenue, and perhaps this has been before the City Council several times in the past. 2008, I believe it was before the council, and prior to that, in 1989, there was a request to build a Montessori school on school properties as well. What we really would like to know is, because it was such an overwhelming vote on the last council, perhaps Mr. Marcus could explain to us how this request differs from previous requests.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of Ms. Fry and Dr. Fry, who is the owner of the property that houses his professional practice, and has for many years, actually. Warren, you said that this had been before the committee before. A number of years ago, we applied to the city of Danbury to purchase a strip of land located along the westerly side of the subject property on Hospital Avenue. That would have been to acquire the title to a piece owned by the city of Danbury, which is part of the Broadview School. That proposal was shot down, I do know that. The proposal that we've made this evening, which is before you this evening, the proposal we've made is to lease a piece of property to the rear of the subject property on Hospital Avenue, which is what we think, and our surveyors think, is a sort of an excess piece of property that can't be accessed by anybody on the school property because of the grade. It's down a steep embankment. So the difference between what we're talking about this evening and what we've talked about previously is the prior proposal was to acquire street frontage property on Hospital Avenue, acquired in fee, simple, title, absolute, forever. When that proposal was not something that we could follow up on, the city was not interested in, the property was developed within the confines of the now existing property line. You have before you a map, and let me pass another map down in this direction, because you've got people down here that you can spread that one out too. So the map that we have here is the property that is on Hospital Avenue that is currently used as a professional medical office building. And we've given you the site plan. The heavy dotted line, which is at the south side of the property, is where essentially the zone line, the zone line between the two properties exists. And there should be a legend on here that gives us that. But there's a drainage easement and a construction limit line that are also shown on the map. So the heavy dotted line would be the construction limit line of the current property. But what we've got here is a section that is shaded in, and it says proposed easement, 6-foot easement for evergreen hedge screen along the school property, And the piece that we propose to be leased is shown to the right of the parcel. And so the shape of the piece, as you can see, is squared off the top, and then it comes down at an angle, and it fits in to the map. And it would be parking spaces 11 and 1 through 11 and 1 through 8 along the south end of the property. Anyway, the whole reason for making this request, that the current use of the property has sufficient parking to meet Danbury zoning regs. However, because of the nature of the practice here, people are in and out of this parking lot, and patients who have appointments are waiting for each other to leave because there's enough parking spaces to accommodate all the patients. But the timing is that if you get there during a busy, when it's busy on the lot, you're gonna sit there until somebody who had the appointment just before you leaves. So what you get is a lot of congestion in this parking lot. And quite honestly, it's just inconvenient for the patients and the clients that use this practice. So Dr. Fry called me in a year ago, and he said to me that, can you propose a way that we can try to address our parking needs so that we can add additional parking that wasn't required, but we think it would be to the benefit of our clients. And we got Paul Fagan, who did the map, out on the property, and we looked around, and what we determined was the section that's proposed right now behind the Fry's parking lot is a section that is inaccessible because of the grades from the school property. So on the school property, they built an artificial turf field.
Caplanis Field is elevated about
Exactly.
10 or 12 feet.
Yeah,
Right.
and there's no way by vehicle and even by walking to get down that slope to the piece that we're talking about making into a parking lot. So we determined, when I say we, Paul Fagan and I, determined that the only use that could ever really be made of this property is to access it from Hospital Avenue over the existing driveway that services the medical office building. And we've applied to the city to lease this property so that we can grade it and put parking spaces in here. And the reason for that, obviously, is for our benefit, because we'll have additional parking for our clients. But we also think we're gonna benefit the city of Danbury 3 ways. A, we will pay rent. Now, the city of Danbury has a pretty standard, and Les is here, formula for determining rent for parking spaces. The last one I did was an airport lease over on Bacchus Avenue for Erstadt Biddle. We negotiated that probably about 3 years ago. And we had a value that was determined based upon an appraisal, and we termed out a lease. So the city can get some rent for a piece of property which is virtually useless. Number 2 is we pay taxes. The city, when it rents property, puts it back on the tax roll. So you get some additional monies for taxes, which we're willing to pay. But the real benefit, quite honestly, to the city is you get a parking area for your athletic field. Anybody who wants to walk up and down this bank, and people do, because people currently use our parking lot in connection with the field. And so if we create additional parking, they're welcome to use it. Because quite honestly, the field, parking requirements for that field are generally weekends and maybe evenings in the summertime, you know, when it's light. The parking requirements for the medical office drop way down. They're there on Saturday with a very reduced staff, so their parking requirements are minimal on Saturday, and on Sunday they're actually closed. No one's there. So Currently, as I say, from time to time, if you go up on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday, you're gonna see people parked in the parking lot here because they're using the field. We would welcome that, and we will provide them additional parking. So there's 3 benefits to the city. 2 of them are financial, and one of them is just that we're gonna create parking at our expense, because we're gonna end up doing the construction, that will benefit the use of the property. As I say, all you gotta do is be willing to walk up and down the back, which a lot of people won't wanna do, but some will. I know that the planning commission has a negative referral because they think that school property is too valuable to lease, and I would agree with them generally, but I don't know that they went out and looked at this, because if you look at this.
Well, that's why I wanted to address that as well, that
Yeah.
make it a matter of record that the planning commission did give a negative recommendation on this property based on future use. And I guess my question is, had we sold the property to a Montessori school in 1998, we would have never been able to build Caplanis Field and some of the, and Locust Avenue School. So that even though these properties sometimes seem like they're surplus, they do have values that could be, something could, as someone said once before, I can construct almost anything anywhere. And Neil, I know that you've been in construction long enough to know that that in fact is the truth. So.
Well, I gotta show you, these are some pictures that we took of the area. But the one right here in the middle, that passes around, is the most instructive. Because basically, you're looking from the parking lot here into the area that we want to lease right here. So you'll see that here's a substantial grade up to the field, and the fence behind the field, and this is kind of the area. And quite honestly, with the snow on it, it doesn't do it justice either. You can see a little bit better how rugged that is when there's no snow. I mean, right now.
I have an aerial view.
You got an aerial view, which is even better. Let's take a look at you. Yeah, I mean, that gives you an idea too. It's an area that, as I say, I'll pass that around if people want to look. But basically, the big picture in the center is a picture that gives you an idea of the terrain. This area down here is not going to be an athletic field. I'll tell you that much. It's not big enough, first of all. It's an area which, as I say, really could be beneficial to allow additional parking. I'm hoping that if the commission, if the council members that haven't really been up there before they form an opinion, take the opportunity to ride up there. You can drive into the parking lot, it's real easy, and just, get out of your car and look around, even without walking on this property. You just go to the end of the current pavement, the parking spaces, you'll get a real idea of why, actually, I don't think the city's gonna lose anything by offering to lease this. And I actually think that in the future, you'll get some more benefit, because the parking will be available to people that are gonna use Caplanis Field. So that's the difference. The difference is, before we were talking about land that might have had some other value because it had access from the street. Here you're talking about property which really is inaccessible unless you're gonna cut through the parking lot.
Well, I was up there this weekend and looked over the property, and the drop-off doesn't occur until the far end of the Fry property. And the elevation change for the Caplanis, I looked around there and they use that for a number of things, and if they ever wanted to put a track around the football field, they would potentially do that.
Down there. You think that, I'm not sure they'd put a track down this far. I mean, I think there's still plenty of room up here for a track to go around the field.
Around the field.
Yeah, but once you're down here, I mean, you're not running on level ground. You're going up and down hill. But as I say, the proposal would be to screen the parking lot. And again, if we get that far, obviously, we need to go to the planning commission for a site plan approval to construct the parking. But the proposal is to screen it and actually to improve the view off of Caplanus Field than you get now. I mean, now, yeah, I mean, even though it's wooded, it's pretty scruffy in there. This would be a real landscaped buffer that we think will improve it. And that's it. As I said, we haven't talked about the dollars because I know that the formula may have changed to be, prices have gone up and down over the last few years. I know
The location makes a difference.
Yeah, location, yeah.
Well, you may mention the Olive Garden and and I said, well, that's $80,000, that's an enticement, you know?
I'm not sure this is an $80,000 parking lot, but.
Well, I wasn't sure whether you were talking about that.
Yeah, but the last parcel that we did, actually, the last lease that I did was around the Erstadt Biddle, which was originally for Chuck E. Cheese. Yeah, we did a parking lot that we built adjacent, and then we released the parking lot in the rear. And we had a formula that worked, and as I say, there's some income to the city. And by the way, there's, to the property owner's side of this thing, there's an expense in developing this. I mean, they're gonna make a capital improvement to the city. Ultimately, when the lease is over, it'll revert back. We haven't talked about how many years this would be, but again, I'm not worried about that because we've negotiated reasonable terms with reasonable renewals. And obviously, if the city had a need for it, then the renewal would be more difficult in the future. But for the time being, I think that this actually serves the city to be part of it.
I can, Mr. Iero, would you like to comment from the Public Works?
Good.
Antonio.
Yeah, we took a look at, obviously it was in a different location, I think in 2008. Public Works really had no objection to it. We don't have an objection to this. I deal with school facilities and maintenance of school buildings. I haven't heard any need for potentially any expansion. And if we did, this probably wouldn't be the easiest area to expand parking into. From our perspective, should the council approve it, once they go in for their site plan approval, we'll review the drainage, we'll review the circulation internally and make sure there's no traffic issues. For the record, I mean, Public Works doesn't have
It would
an
be
issue.
subject to your approval anyway.
Right.
Jack?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, Les, as far as the terms of the lease go, or Neil, as far as the terms of the lease go, are we looking at a short-term lease, long-term lease? I mean, you mentioned Erstadt Biddle, and I was on that group when it was before us, and that was a pretty long-term deal, and it was all tied into the property owners. Personally, I don't understand why we wouldn't do this. I said 6 years ago I thought it was a good idea, but because now we really have, and Antonio pretty much created a piece of surplus property by the way that we built Caplanus Field, with the way that field's designed. I went up there and looked at it today myself. It really is something that we could develop into parking, but if somebody else wants to do it for us, why not take advantage of that? So that's the way I'm viewing it. But my concern is the length of the lease. Is this something that's going to be a 3-year lease? Are we looking at 10 years? What are we looking at as far as that goes?
Through the chair, I don't think, Jack, there's a specific proposal on the table as far as the particulars. I think what's been identified, as Attorney Marcus has said, is the location, what they would do with the property. We would follow the committee's recommendation on the term of the lease. Other provisions of the lease would be standard, the insurances and all of that, but the term would be something you would decide as with the compensation.
So procedurally, this committee's charged with approving moving forward towards a lease or approving a lease, because there's no lease, then we can't approve it.
You're charged with reviewing the request and recommending a lease. with
Okay.
specific terms.
And then when the lease
Established.
did get developed, it would have to come back before us, or would that?
Doesn't have to come back to you, you can do that if you want to, you can approve terms tonight as far as recommendation, for example, let's say you would recommend to the full council to approve this lease proposal for a term of X years at so-and-so per parking space, or based upon the size of the lot, you can specify all that tonight, you can do that right now, or you can recommend approval of the lease with terms and conditions to be returned to you, continue the meeting, in other words, something like that, we could do that as well.
Can I add something a little less succinct, Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, because we gotta go back to the planning commission. We may not end up with this configuration, you know, we think it works, but ultimately the planning commission has to approve it. So I think it really has to be in steps. If the concepts make sense and we get the go-ahead, then I think the next thing we have to do is really go to planning, figure out what the parking lot really is,
Right.
and then negotiate.
Yeah, there'll be some
Fine.
contingencies
Yeah.
with the recommendation, of course. Yeah.
Peter,
Les and I'll have no problem figuring that out.
Councilman Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was up here today, I walked this property here, I didn't go into the snow, I looked at it and I started shaking my head wondering what we would ever do with it. And the saying my father-in-law had a long time ago, he said, Peter, remember, money can make water run uphill. And that goes back to what you were saying, you can build anything anyways. But in looking at this spot, I kept thinking, I really can't see what we're gonna really be able to do with this thing. And if, as you said, Attorney Marcus, if we take steps and it comes back to us after it goes through the other departments, so that we can then address what the lease agreements are, to me, I'm for recommending that we move this forward, at least that's where I stand on this, so thank you, sir.
Mr. Cobb.
Thank you, Mr. Levy. Through you to Mr. Pinter, and then I'm just gonna have just a brief statement. Les, would there be a benefit to doing a license agreement versus a lease agreement in this? Would you prefer a license versus a lease?
Well, if the council wants to go with a license, that would not be an interest in the real property. Those are more easily terminable and revocable. They're probably less favorable to the petitioner because they don't have the permanency or interest in real estate. But for the city, there are some advantages to that.
Okay. And the other thing I just wanted to add was 6 years ago when we had this before us, the proposed lot was on the side of the building and it was taking that open space piece, if you want to call it that. I didn't call it that at the time until I started getting calls from my constituents who, that is my ward that I represent, and were just infuriated by it because there were some driveway changes proposed, and I see that now there's no driveway changes proposed currently in this drawing, and that it's not going to have people's headlights going into people's homes across the street, and so I'm much more comfortable with this, with the parking parcel being in the back. So from my standpoint, and from hopefully my constituents in that area, they'll be happier knowing that we're not taking that piece of wooded property that I had thought at the time could have been leveled and paved and would have looked better, but they didn't feel that way. And moving it to the back of the property just makes a lot more sense to me. So, I would be in favor of this.
So, my teachers used to say I was a slow learner, but eventually I could figure things out. We figured it out.
You know, I wanted to review this myself, and that's why I did a lot of looking at it, and I said, really, what's changed here, what is the situation, and I thought about my responsibility. My responsibility is to be somewhat of a watchdog for the public, and also to serve the public for the best interest of the public. And I don't know whether leasing out this property, in the case of the reference to the Red Lobster and the Olive Garden, we had to do what we did there because of the federal government. So there was a motivation from that standpoint, and there was also a lot of money involved. It was the cities just earn a lot of money on land they really couldn't use. Along with that parking lot as well, which Les perhaps remembers, I served on the committee and came back with some of the numbers on what it costs to develop a parking space and how we should come up with a lease price on that property. So I've kind of adopted the idea that we should be buying property around the schools as our city grows, that these properties become more valuable, and that it doesn't have an overwhelming public good to liquidate it. Even on a temporary basis, which a license or a lease would create, because it involves a lot of legal maneuvering. We'd also have to, perhaps depending on what we wanted to develop there, we'd have to take up the parking lot, reconfigure, additional excavation, you might say. And I see it where the property could be used. It could be, even if it's passive area that separates the schoolyard from the roadside. And I realize that the recommendation is to plant shrubbery, but I think the planning commission, they've taken that same view, is that we should preserve any properties we have and acquire properties adjacent to schools for future use. As our community grows, the property becomes more valuable. And I tend to, it's gonna take 14 votes on the city council to overturn the planning commission. And I think that their wisdom over the years and prior years was based on the same type of analysis, that we should be retaining properties that surround our schools, not leasing them out. $3,000 or $4,000 for an annual lease on a parking lot doesn't make sense. As a matter of fact, I would rather see that land developed by the city for a parking lot of its own, and let Dr. Fry use the school property for parking. There's nothing wrong with that. And let him build a staircase down the grade to the back of his parking lot, and the city will still retain it. So that's one of the options there. And Councilman Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your comments greatly about retaining the property. And depending on how the lease or the license, or however we want to get down to the wording of it, is structured, the amount of money that we can make from this between the taxes and the parking space, and I don't know what that's going to be, once again. And as Attorney Marcus pointed out, and so did Attorney Pinter, you do it in steps kind of thing. Depending on how long this property remains in a lease or license agreement, the city is collecting funds. So I think that does a lot more for the good of the community. And it's not a huge amount. It's not going to reduce somebody's taxes. You probably won't even see it, but maybe Antonio can go buy more salt. I don't know. But the point is, money is coming in while this is sitting here. And before this property is needed, and again, this is a blue sky call. I don't know what the future's going to hold. But before this property is needed, a lot of things may have to happen in Danbury, and this could be 5 or 10 years away. I don't know that, but it could be. Meanwhile, this property is bringing revenue into the city where it can be used. And once again, if the folks that are willing to lease this property from us realize that whatever the lease may be, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, at that point, everybody walks away and says, we need it now, sorry, and they could walk away with a smile, then I see this being a potential source of income for the city in the near term. But once again, I say that in appreciation for your comments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I think they were talking in the last lease, or last time around, something like $2,500 a year lease for the property, plus $1,000 scholarship. Go ahead, Councilman.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to Peter's statement, Mr. Nero's statement. I understand exactly where you're coming from, Mr. Levy. listened to this back 6 years ago. I don't see this as we're liquidating a piece of property. If anything, we're taking advantage of some neighbors because, as you heard and I've experienced during the football games that go on up there, the parking lot's overcrowded. There's long walks for some people, so that's another 15 to 20 spaces that are gonna save some trips. And then when somebody's attending a football game, climbing up the hill or climbing around a tree, it doesn't seem to be an issue. So I see it as a positive thing. As far as the money goes, it's not a overwhelming, you stated it perfectly, it's not an overwhelming amount of money, one way or the other. So it's not the little bit of help that it does make will help us in some small areas, but it's not like we're banking on this and taking advantage of it. But I just see it as a win-win, because eventually, if it does if we do determine that we need more parking there down the road, there's nothing to stop us from developing the parking adjacent to that and taking advantage of that parking as well as more parking. So I don't really see a future in it in the next 10 years of anything other than parking or empty space. So better to take advantage of it now and expand on it down the road if we have the opportunity.
Councilman Palmer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Levy. Definitely, I'll go for all this plan that we seeing right now. Sounds like it's very interesting to the city, but I would like to see if there is a way that we be able to have a bond, depending on how much the lease will be, and also to have some kind of opening to say if in case the city need this property, will be open for the city as long as we let them know within 30 days or 60 days, because like you say, maybe in 5, 10 years somebody can do something, or we plan to do something, the city can plan to do something, and in this case the property will be available for the city. But because we have seen some issues in the past, if we be able to have a bond that protect the city for in case not happen to be paid the lease or anything happen, the city will be covered and be protected in any case.
Question for Les. Les, if we're to make a motion to move forward with this tonight, what verbiage should I use in the motion so that we have the opportunity to review the terms? I'm very cautious as just saying, okay, we'll approve it pending the lease. We really need to get that back in front of us, because that's something that really weighs on my mind, and it's something that I really want to see in front of me.
Well, this is a little different from the normal case, because you do have a negative planning commission approval recommendation. So what you probably want to do is go to the full council and get that issue resolved first. So therefore, maybe you want to recommend the negotiation of a lease and return to this committee for further examination with those terms and the final lease document. But that way you get through the gauntlet of the council overturning the 2/3 vote.
Right, I mean, I hate to go through all that work and then only find out that it gets knocked out at the council level. So if we make the motion
You would recommend the negotiation of a lease, essentially, and then that goes to the council, if you're gonna go to the March council?
Yeah, would this require a public hearing?
It might. We'll have to see the terms, the length and the dollars. It might require a public.
yeah, once we got to the lease end of it,
Once you get to that point.
but not for the purpose of getting this in front of the council.
Right. If the council were to, let's say, by 2/3 vote overturn, then they would approve it conditionally. Public hearing, planning approvals, negotiation, whatever other conditions there might be. But as the chairman correctly suggests, you need 14 votes of the council to go the next step anyway, so you might as well get that out of the way right away.
Okay.
Anyway, yes, go ahead,
Thank you,
Councilman
Chairman.
Cabo.
And that's why I had suggested possibility of our corporation council and Mr. Marcus could sit down and possibly come up with a proposed license agreement, which would make it more adaptable for the city, more movable. If Attorney Marcus and his client would agree to a license agreement, it would probably be more beneficial for the city. It would make us a little bit more flexible and also protect some of those things that the chairman was talking about within the use of the property.
Would you possibly suggest that a motion include, we take no action until a lease or a license agreement is
No, I don't think so. I think I would make a motion that I would recommend to the council to forward this to Corporation Counsel's office for the drafting of a license/lease agreement with the final details being returned to this committee for final approval.
To the full body for final.
Right. Right.
If-
Well, we'll
if-
go back to this committee, and this committee, off of that license or lease, would make a recommendation to the council for its final approval. But that would at least, I think, give Mr. Marcus, I'm not mistaken, Mr. Bridger, the ability to apply to planning for that plan, or at least to start that process.
Well, certainly the earlier they know what the city's going to do, the better. If it's, as President Cabo indicated, if you do go with recommendation on the license, you don't need to overcome the planning commission recommendation because it's not an interest in real estate at that point, so you just need a majority vote. So if that's the approach you take, either one, if the council wants to approve a lease, you need that 14 votes. If they decide to go with the license recommendation back to the committee, then you only need the majority. So you can think about that tonight.
Is that something that, Mr. Marcus, that your client would consider?
Yes, and I think actually the way I would structure, following up on Les's comments, is to take this, because we have to know whether the council would be interested in the lease,
Right.
first of all. Take it to the council for the lease, return it here for all the terms. But if the lease fails, then we would pursue the license as a secondary. Lease, license, depending on how they're written,
Right,
they're
exactly.
pretty
Right.
interchangeable.
Absolutely.
So we could do it either way.
That's why I'm thinking the license is probably the better way to go, because I think it just makes it easier, providing the terms are agreeable to both sides.
Well, yeah, I guess if Mr. Marcus's client is going to be investing money in the development of this area,
Yeah, that'd be, to
A
be honest,
license
you
is
hit
very
the nail on
loose.
the head. What we need to know is, in stages, A, we can move the project to the next step. B, we design and go to the planning commission, see what we can build. C, we have to get our cost estimates and find out what we're in line for here. And then, depending on that, back to Councilman's, Nero's question, is it a 3-year lease or 10? I mean, it's gotta be a long enough lease to pay for the cost of the construction. Yeah.
I've got
Yeah.
it.
So the answer is, I agree that all of those steps have to start here, and then we.
Go ahead, Peter, because I'm gonna make
Okay,
a
but in
motion
the-
if you'll let
thank
me.
you.
I just want one piece of information, Les, what would be the best, just give us a little overview of your sense of how you would structure a motion.
Well, having heard that the applicant's preference is for a lease, the recommendation would be from you to the council to approve a lease agreement to be returned to this council for negotiation. As a secondary approval, a license agreement also to be returned to this council for negotiation. That way you overcome either one.
Let me just run this by you. Okay, so if I make a motion to recommend to forward the request of the applicant to Corporation Council for the purpose of a lease and/or license agreement for the property at 84 Hospital Avenue, is that?
You should just say, just to negotiate a lease or a license agreement
Negotiate.
with Corporation Council on such terms and conditions as are worked out. And that's it, then it would be returned to this council from the March, to this committee from the March council. That way you get over that first hurdle, and they would know what the recommendation's gonna be.
Okay, so that will be my motion, then I'd like to make.
Well, go ahead and read the
Are you
motion.
ready for that?
Yep, go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to forward the request of the applicant to Corporation Council for the purpose of negotiating a lease and/or license agreement for the property at 84 Hospital Avenue.
Is it and/or just recommend?
Recommend.
And/or.
Yeah, did I say recommend? I'm sorry. We started with
Okay, one. So it's recommend
We're gonna recommend,
to the full council
right.
to
Recommend.
forward this to Corporation Council
Right.
to negotiate a lease or license.
And/or license.
And/or
And/or
license.
license.
Voting license, yeah. For the property.
Does the committee care which one it is?
How's that?
Do you have a sense of which one?
I like the idea of license, that's been running through my mind just because of knowing what we've gone through in other areas, and it's just more flexible in the city structure. So the license agreement to me would be better, but Mr. Marcus needs to confer with his client on that before they make that decision.
A lot of it is actually, both parties have to be concerned about insurance, which would be different depending on the interest. So we'll work that out. I'm not opposed to going one way or the other. I just think that there are a number of wrinkles that you really want to think out, because the city's insurance company may prefer a lease to a license. I'm not sure. Our insurance company may prefer one or the other, but we'll work that out. It'll
That's
be
one
or
of
the
the
other.
things that
Yeah.
that would have to be encompassed within the lease.
Right.
We'll do it.
Okay, I think the ball's in my court to second it because there's a motion on the table.
It's his.
And guide me here.
You seconding for the purpose of discussion, is that what you do?
Well, well, if I second it, we come back, can I amend the motion after I
Sure,
second it?
absolutely.
I just, because I'm, okay.
You would like to second it with the following amendment?
Second this with a friendly amendment, if I may do that.
Okay.
I don't even know what I wrote.
Okay. Let me just.
I gotta-
Sure, not a problem.
But I still need to get some advice through you, Mr. Chairman, from Mr. Pinter.
If you, once the motion is seconded,
Seconded.
it's open for discussion.
Which I seconded. I did second.
You did second.
I did second.
Let the record reflect.
Let the record reflect that I
Mr.
seconded.
Nero seconded.
Thank you.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Nero?
Through you.
What a surprise.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. If I understood what was said, it would appear that asking for the license would fly a lot easier in the council.
It might, you need fewer votes in any
You
case.
need fewer votes.
Right.
But, and I'm here for the city, not for your client, Mr. Marcus, but in the interest of fair play,
Yeah, I'm a taxpayer. I'm here for the city too.
you know, I'm trying to look down the road here, you know, and see which way it's gonna make the most sense to move forward. And we're all here for that too. I'm just having difficulty understanding if the license way versus the lease way, and if the license way is gonna protect all of the parties involved as well. And by saying make it a lease and/or a license, if I were just sitting out there on the council and that came before me cold, I would say, explain the difference to me, Les.
Okay.
That's what I.
I'm just gonna say,
Go on.
you know, that's what they need is, a license is when you go into a stadium to see an event, you buy a ticket, you bought a license. Is that correct?
Well, there's differences.
You can be kicked out of the stadium too, the license is over with.
May I withdraw my friendly amendment?
Yeah. Go ahead.
May I just do that?
Go ahead, Les.
There are some relevant differences for purposes of security for the tenant. You know, the license, depending upon its terms, there's not much permanency to it in many cases, and therefore, if you make an investment in money or in construction, you may lose that investment halfway through or partially through. Maybe the rent would be different for a license, since that's a risk that they would have to ride. That's another issue. You have, there might be some insurance differences, probably those may be not that meaningful. A lease is an interest in land, you need to overcome that planning vote. Typically, it would be longer term, a lease, as opposed to a license. License, you kind of hobble along, you know. The license kind of says, we want you there, but we don't really know for how long. So when we're tired of you, then we'll ask you to leave. And that works in the cases where you've approved like a parcel of land for flower growing or a really short-term use, like you did with the hackerspace down there. This situation, again, it's gonna be up to Neil and his clients, the level of investment and the reliance on the length of the use of this property may lean them more toward a lease. But, you know, so anyway, that's an issue that probably is more determinative of their interest than the city's interest. So the difference is permanency, the level of investment that they want to make in the property, and your comfort with the permanency of the real estate, because you're going to be giving them a piece of real estate. And so that's a big difference.
But let him continue. Continue, Mr. Nero.
I'm gonna withdraw my friendly amendment. May I do that? I'm gonna withdraw my friendly amendment. I can do that.
What was it?
Well, my friendly, well, I was gonna say friendly amendment.
I scribbled a lot of notes, but I didn't scribble that one.
No, that's all right, because I didn't really, I wanted to ask the question I wanted to ask the question
Okay, I got you.
to formulate the friendly amendment. But since it doesn't seem to change what you said, I'm just gonna stick with my second. And
Okay.
Then just a point of order for Les. Between now and next Tuesday, as it will, this is just a recommendation to the council. Council has to make their formal motion and agree upon it next week. We could determine between now and then whether we want to move ahead with a license agreement or a lease agreement and throw it in that motion, which would be the binding one, not necessarily
You
this.
could do that. This is just your
So we can
recommendation.
get this off of the committee, close out the committee, get it in front of the council with, and make it more formal.
Somebody there could make a motion to lease the property
Right.
at that time, at that night.
Or
Somebody could make a
the
motion.
license agreement.
Or the license, or to approve the license, yeah. One motion requires a certain number of votes, the other motion requires another kind of vote.
Okay, I'm happy with my motion.
Okay, just for clarity's
Are you
sake.
kidding me?
Well, I think you need that as well.
I got it.
You got it? Okay, you got it.
I think I can recite it.
I'm afraid I'm reading it wrong again.
What, Les, do you want to repeat what you
Yeah, I
recollect?
guess the most salient point is if the committee is leaning toward one or the other, you should probably, you can say that. If the preference of the committee is for a lease, you should say that, because it makes it easier for the council. If you want to do the and/or, you can do that, but then you leave it to the council to make that motion on the floor. So the council many times likes to hear from the committee, you know, what is it that you really want? You want a lease? Then they vote on that.
You didn't, in other words, the motion as it stands right now is recommendation that the corporation council negotiate a lease or a license for the purposes of,
And that's going to require the council to make a decision. You know, somebody will make a motion to lease, 2/3 vote.
okay.
If that fails, then maybe go to license. If it passes, then come
And
back.
would you have something that you could produce in that period of time?
We could probably give you a template.
Because I think Mr. Nero was interested in reading terms and things of that
Are you?
nature. If everybody's clear on that, the committee is clear on the motion, are you
Yeah, I
ready?
mean, I hear what you're asking to say either it's a license tonight or a lease. I'm really not comfortable with doing that tonight. I know I will be by next Tuesday,
Okay.
because then I can do a little more research into exactly the direction we want to go.
Okay.
And make sure that the motion goes in that direction next week.
Okay,
So
try your
understand my
minds.
motion. Yep.
Try your minds on the motion being that we recommend, this committee recommends to the full council that a lease be negotiated or a license with the petitioner. Is that correct?
Yep.
Try your minds, all those in favor?
Aye.
Let the record indicate there's 2 ayes, Mr. Nero and Mr. Knapp, and 1 nay, Mr. Lee. Is there any further business to come
I'd
before
like
this
to make a
committee?
motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you.
All in favor?